History of the Oregon PGA governance. Who wants to answer it?
Well, I'm the oldest one here. I was here when the chapter first started. So, in fact, California had the first chapters out here on the west, and we went down and met with them, and they told us what they did, and then we came back and we split into 3 chapters here in the section, and that's way back. That was a long time ago, because I was president in 63 to 67, and I think Bunny was president before that.
Memory serves me, not that I'm old enough to probably remember, but we were branches back then rather than chapters.
That's
Is
right,
that correct?
yeah. We called ourselves branches.
Bunny, I know was instrumental. He hired Dale Johnson, who was the first executive secretary of any section in the country. He was the first. Bunny had hired him, and wasn't that before 1963, Don?
Oh, yeah, that was before
Late 50s.
Yeah.
And Dale Johnson, who was an old friend of Bill Muffler's, ran the chapter and the OGA office and the Northwest PGA office and the PNJ office, all out of a small office in downtown Portland. And I started getting involved in the early 60s with the people I worked with. Harry Clough had been the president, but Eddie Hogan had been the president. And it just seemed like a natural thing for me to do is to continue on. That's how I got involved. But Al had been there before myself, and so had Vern.
Yeah, that's, I actually got involved with, Bunny assigned me to be part of the tournament committee, and actually I scooted out of the state of Oregon right about that time in the mid-60s. But I can remember when there was a tremendous amount of discussion that Bunny talked to some of the membership that was not too hot on having somebody like Dale come in and start operating like he owned the place. But it was the best thing that ever happened, and I know that Bunny spent a lot of time convincing people that we needed to have somebody like Dale Johnson, and he did a wonderful job. He really did.
I do believe that Dale was the ED until 1989. Does that ring a bell with you guys? Then Dave Ingham followed Dale, and then Jeff McFarland, and I believe that Cliff Jones actually worked for a short time before Rich Holland took over, and now Dominic Marconi.
And that was back in the days before computers. Dale ran his office. What was it? Bob's worked for him. And he had another part-timer.
Yep.
Good big guy. And Dale did all of that. But Dale had been a sports writer for the Oregonian.
The Journal.
Bill was at the Journal. And Dale was a hell of a good sports writer. And went in the investment business for a while as a counselor, and then came with us. And I used to say that when I was president of the section, I'd have never made it without him on my right elbow, because the guy knew procedures, and a lot of times I'd have to give him the old elbow and say, "What do you think?" And he'd tell me, and then I'd tell the group, and the group thought I was pretty smart.
My experience, I've been a member since '76, but in 1962, when I was a peewee, played in my first out-of-Salem tournament, and I was 11 years old, and the first person I met was Dale Johnson. So you can see that he had a person who ran all the different organizations in the Northwest.
A couple words about Dale. Great friend, great guy. He played by the rules. He played no favorites at all. I remember one time that they had on the schedule, it said that the Oregon medal play was going to be 2 days like it always had been, and they changed it. And I didn't know that, and somebody told me, Chuck Milne told me, He says, "You're supposed to be up there today, Kent." So I called Dale and I said, "Hey, could you put me in on a late starting time?" And he says, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in Lake Oswego." He said, "You're disqualified."
I always used to get, in the Oregon Open, it seemed like I always got paired with Ben Doyle. And he was the slowest player in the world. And I always be going down a fairway and I'd look behind me and here come Dale over the hill with a golf cart and to tell us to speed up. But Ben had his own pace and he still, in fact, one time, I forget who was with me, but we putted out on 18 and then sat there and waited for him to hit his third shot.
Now you're the one coming over the hill.
That's right.
That's right.
I've come over the hill a few times.
Why did you feel it was important to get in the involvement in the governance of the PGA?
But in getting involved, I felt over the years, I received an awful lot going through the business schools and attending a lot of seminars over the years. I gained an awful lot for the PGA education system. And Chuck and Mr. Colbert kind of instilled in me, well, don't just be a taker, try to be a giver. So I tried to get involved and was involved in the education program a season or two. And Vern Perry was involved as a chairman of the education committee. But the thing that I guess I've learned the most is try and give back to the PGA what you've received.
I didn't have much choice because a professional by the name of Jim Shifty Sheldon, who was my first employer in the business, said, "You're getting involved and you're going to get on that assistance committee." So I started on the assistance committee, and then I got kind of chumming around a little bit with Skogstad and Vern Perry, and I got involved with, at the time, what was referred to as a club relations committee, and that transferred or transposed into the career services committee, which I was involved for quite a while. And then an opening on the Oregon chapter board came available due to the absence or defecting of Lou Alleman, which I'm sure some of you remember, Sweet Lou. And J.D. Molds was on the board at the time, and he says, "Huff," he says, "I think you're the guy that needs to step in and take that spot," and then the rest is history.
Yeah, I was never involved with the Oregon PGA because I was an amateur. Bunny used to ask me, "How come you stayed an amateur?" I said I could never chip bad enough to be a golf pro. But I hired Dale.
The whole line was, Don, why did you never become a golf pro? He says, I didn't own any alligator shoes and couldn't chip bad enough.
But I hired Dale as for the Oregon Golf Association in the, can't remember the name of that building downtown, but he and Patty, can't remember her last name, and Dave, that was the most smoke-filled room I was ever in my life. It was just awful. But Dale was good. He had his flaws, but he was a great administrator. You know, he smoked too much and drank. He was the only guy I knew that could sleep standing up. I thought he was a horse. I mean, he could do it. But he was a good man.
I got involved in the association my first year when we opened Michael Book Country Club in McMinnville, Oregon. We literally shooed the cows out. We did a education seminar at Broadmoor. Eggers and I and Dean Doherty and a couple other guys got together, and we had a great time putting this thing together. We got together a couple times and had a few beers, and it was really kind of fun. And I thought, well, if that's the way it's going to be. And I always enjoyed the people that I worked with, not just employees of the chapter or the section, But the other golf professionals who were giving so much of their time and effort for, very honestly, a lot of people who didn't do hardly anything. And I guess that's the way it is with the way things are for everybody. But as I went through the ranks and the chairs, or whatever they call it, I always had good people to work with. Other golf professionals, I was always so pleased when I met other golf professionals who wanted to work for the chapter and the national. What a good group they were, and they were willing to do anything for the PGA. And I just I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the people that were doing it. And next thing you know, it's 25 years later.
I worked for Bunny Mason, which was a real education in itself, and Bunny did want me to do some things and get out and help others within the section and chapter. And I was working in club relations, and first of all it was in the branch, and then pretty soon it was in the section, and nobody else wanted the job, and I enjoyed doing what I was doing. And there were a couple of pros who were having problems, and they were just about ready to be fired. And this was what was really enjoyable, to be able to do something in their behalf. And so I made contacts with the boards of directors of both fellows, and said I wanted to meet with each one of them separately, and which I did. And it was amazing how little they did know about what we as golf professionals did. And so anyhow, I asked both boards of directors to please give your professional an opportunity to talk with you about the problems. And they had never talked to him and never said, you aren't doing a good job. And I told the board, I said, is this the way you handle your corporate affairs? Because if you do, you're not doing a very good job. And nobody took exception to it, fortunately. Anyhow, both jobs were saved. I got more out of helping others than I received back. I got a lot back, but you know, when you talk about trying to get people to involve themselves in PGA affairs, sometimes they're a little hesitant and think that they can't do the job, but all the people long in here have disproven that. And I think that our young people, we really need to encourage them to participate one way or another. And I think the head professionals maybe need to nudge the young men, and also maybe nudge the chairman of whatever committee it is to make contact with them.
I got involved, turned pro in 1959. Went to work at Royal Oaks for Harry Clough. He was the president of the chapter. Then I went to Eddie Hogan, Riverside, in 1960, and he was very active in the golf. And he had been the president of the chapter also, and a great player, and on the section board. And the natural involvement, Duke Matthews was the tournament chairman, and when he dropped out, I got assigned a tournament chairman in about 1960 something, 66 maybe. And from my involvement, was mostly playing and teaching in the tournament committee. And I was a tournament chairman for a long time, and that because of these guys were ahead of me, Al and Vern and Don were all ahead of me. Who else is here, not here, that was on the presidents of the chapter and section. I just kind of followed them, and it seemed Bunny's name keeps coming up because he was such an influence to all of us here of this era, because he did it all. He was a great public speaker. He started the education program. He hired Dale Johnson. He tried to play, but he had the yips a little bit. But he never did forget Dale Johnson for disqualify him in the spring tour down there that year. He had his only good round he'd had in 10 years, and Dale threw him out of the tournament. and you never did forgive him for that, but his name keeps coming up as what an influence he was to all of us. And as I became the chapter president and then the section president and went on to follow Vern, I think I followed Vern as a national director. Or did I follow Vern?
Yeah.
And then Huffer, you became after me. Vern followed you as a national director.
Yeah.
And then I followed Vern, and then you followed me later on, right?
No, Waddy.
Wattenberger, yeah. Where is he, by the way? But anyway, it's just, it kind of becomes, and as Al so well said, you get a lot more out of serving and doing those things and trying to help people out and help the section out than you can't ever get ahead of it. You always get more back than you put in. And this has been a great group of guys over the years. And it is, thanks to Garth Matson and his company for putting this together, and Bill and Dom for putting this together. This has been needed to be done for a while.
Since Bunny's name comes up all the time, I was at Salem Golf Club where Pat was and Chuck Milne, and one of the times out there Chuck misbehaved, and so Bunny took the key and locked his clubs in a locker for a week. And I'd have to say there's other sides. Bunny and I had kind of a running contest during our lives. And Bunny was a great inspiration to me. He told me, Myers, you will never be a golfer. And that was the greatest inspiration that I ever had. And we had some off and ons after that, but later, when I qualified for the U.S. Open up in Tacoma, Bunny said, are you going? I had no money. And I said, I don't think I am. And he said, nobody turns down the U.S. Open. So he saw to it that I got a flight back there. So good and bad, but he was fun. And I saw him make a double eagle on 18 at Salem once.
I happened to be the master of ceremonies. Bunny retired twice. He retired from Columbia Edgewater, and then he retired from Black Butte. And I told him after the Black Butte, that's when, there were a bunch of guys, I don't know, a bunch of guys were there. And we got all done, and then you're going to have a roast, and we chewed him up pretty good, and he was sitting in a chair over there drinking red wine. He was just sloshed. I mean, he was just awful. He said, we had one of those portable mics, and he wanted to get the mic to rebuttal all this stuff. He said, I pulled the thing out of the floor and threw it on the floor, and everybody got up and left. But the one thing with Bunny, there were a couple of hundred people there. So Bunny was Bunny. He was caustic. And I'll never forget the time we were golfing one day and we're coming down the third hole, riding in a cart. And some guy up on 14 had his cart in the wrong place. And he said, I'll be back in a minute. And he comes back about 2 minutes later. I said, did you lay all that Bunny Mason school of charm on him, Bunny? He said, yeah. He said, I pissed off another one of the members. I said, that's not good. But he was a unique individual. Everybody talked about him. He was pretty unique. He really was. In a lot of ways, so I miss him.
Since we're on the subject of Bunny, I grew up at Salem, and he was the head pro from 50 to 59, and I moved there in 57, so he was the first pro I came in contact with. And he always took credit for teaching me the game, because at a group lesson he told me not to change a thing when I was 8 years old. But he invented the term bipolar. So I worked for him at Black Butte, and one day he had the Prince's hat on, and the next day he had something else on. And he and I also shared the same birthday.
Having worked with Bunny for about 6 years, I got to see a few different sides of him, just like we all did. And fellow by the name of Jack Nicklaus was playing in the Portland Open at Columbia Edgewater, and he was playing pretty slow. And Bunny went up to him after the round. He says, I'm going to see to it that you get a 2-stroke penalty. And Jack says, well, I'm not sure you're really going to do that. And Bunny says, well, we'll take a look at it. And sure enough, he got a 2-stroke penalty for slow play. And, and Bunny saw him in a restaurant later that week, and actually Jack invited him over for breakfast, and Bunny went over and they sat and talked. And I asked Bunny, I said, I understand you had a little talk with Jack Nicklaus, and he said, yeah. He said, he's learned. But Bunny was,
Of course,
you
he
know,
still won the tournament, which helped.
yeah, I was just gonna say, he won the tournament by 2 strokes.
History of golf and courses in Oregon.
I don't think a lot of people know that in the 30s, Portland had more golf courses than any other city in the world. And of course, during the Depression, 1930 to 1945 or so, we lost a lot of golf courses. One of the golf courses was called Peninsula, and it was where the horse track is now. There was a 36-hole course out east of town. You remember?
Inverness.
Inverness. But there was a lot of golf courses, and of course they all had golf professionals, but they disappeared, and probably now we got more golf courses than we need. But anyway, Portland, Oregon was a real golf hub on the West Coast, and in the 30s, the tour would come through here, and Lamberger could tell us stories about when the tour came to Portland Golf Club and how they would sometimes tee it up the next morning in the clothes they wore yesterday because they hadn't been to bed yet. But anyway, that's a little bit of trivia.
And Mr. Hudson loaned them some money so they could get out of town when he first was sponsoring the Portland Opens, because some of those guys didn't have enough money and they didn't make any that week here at the Portland Open, so Hudson loaned them the money so they could get to the next town.
Back in the late 70s, I wrote a book called Golf in Oregon, and there were 135 courses in the state at that time. I visited all of them. One of the things that impressed me in some of the little towns, like Echo and some of these places, these people cherished their golf courses. In the book, I never criticized any course. I never downplayed anything. The purpose was to get people to travel around and play different courses. Rose City was an interesting story. Eastmoreland was already going, and we had they called it the Rose City Raceway. If you notice, there's a bowl out there at Rose City. And so a bunch of guys, well, I'll tell you first. First of all, it was a raceway. Barney Oldfield raced there, and it was a very popular place. Well, it flooded one year and wiped out one end of the bowl. And so that was the end of the raceway. So a bunch of players came out, and they got tomato cans and posts, sticks, and they stuck them in the ground and said, we now have a golf course. So they went down to the Oregon Journal and said, we have a new golf course in Portland. And so it evolved from there, and it was great. But one of the things that happened, and I have a picture in the book, is that 4th of July, back in those days, they decided to have a grand phenomenon out there at the golf course. So they laid tracks in from each end of the golf course, and they put 2 steam engines, one on each end, and they were both going kind of downhill, and they ran them head on into each other, and there was a big gallery of people, and I have that picture in my golf book. One other thing I'd say is that they used to bring the carnival or the circus in there to stay at that place. And I talked to neighbors around as I was doing this about the history, and one lady said, yeah, she said, one day I looked out my window, right in my garden was an elephant. And she said, I called the police, and they said, yeah, ma'am, we know there are flying pigs too. One other thing, Woodburn was the only sand green course in our state, and I think it still has
there.
it.
Yeah, I drove
And
by it
little
today.
9-hole course.
I drove by it
And
today.
you take the drag and you take it over the sand to
there's
smooth
a-
it out after you've putted.
Little box and you put your
Yeah.
money in.
Anyhow, we have a great group of golf courses. And I just say one thing here, we have a great group of professionals. I've kind of grown up with these guys. They've beaten me and I've beaten them. And I have, in my life, some of my deepest friendships are sitting right here.
Agreed. I would just say that Salem Golf Club, where I grew up, was founded in 1927 by a gentleman named Ursel Kay. And since 1927, there have only been 2 owners, Mr. Kay, Senior Ursel, and his son Tom, who is now 94.
I kind of know a little bit about the golf course, doing a little history, but Waverly was the first golf course, country club or 18-hole golf course in Oregon, 1896. But people say that Gearhart might have been a 9-hole golf course before that. So, and you might know that. They say that maybe 1895 or, yeah, Rex says,
There's
yeah.
an argument on that one.
Right.
Depending on where you belong.
Right.
And Waverly first was on a different location.
Yes, correct.
And on Woodstock or somewhere in there. And so Waverly says that, and the guys over at the beach at Gearhart say we were the first because some old Scotsmen laid out holes over there on the dunes.
Where's Tualatin's old? Tualatin's is 1912, I think, 1912. But you also, another golf course that, Alderwood was a great country club, which is where the airport is now. And it was, Bruce might help me with this, but I think it left in 1955, 53? Yeah, the port came in and took over the golf course, but Alderwood was a fantastic golf course. Me being at Riverside and Jerry being at Columbia, a lot of the people from Alderwood, they joined Riverside and Columbia Edgewater after that course was closed. It held the 1937 U.S. Amateur. 10,000 people were following the final group. Johnny Goodman won it, but you have some great golf courses here. Waverly's had USGA events, Eugene's had USC events. It's a great golf, and Vern was right. I mean, there was a lot of golf courses built here in the 20s and the 30s. We were 25, I think Columbia's 25. Portland was 1912. Just tremendous amount of golf courses.
Some of the entertainment, once a month on the men's stag, the assistant pros would go put curtains on the windows and guard the door so nobody could come in for their Thursday night entertainment. You could draw your own conclusions.
Those, I might add, were the biggest crowds.
I went over to Central Oregon in 1946, and that's where the center of golf is pretty much in Oregon now. Fred Hudspeth had 3 holes at Prineville, and there was a 9-hole, very nice 9-hole private club in Bend. That was it. There was nothing else. And there was the original Juniper Golf Course was built in 1952. A guy named Fred Sparks laid it out. He didn't know squat about golf. And it was a nice little mom and papa golf course. But they didn't start building those golf courses in Central Oregon until 1970. I can't remember the first one.
Black Butte was the first 18-hole course in 72.
Yeah, well, whatever. But there was nothing there in 47. I saw Ben Hogan play an exhibition in 1949, 48 at Bend Country Club. Went around it twice, hit it out of the divot hole every time around. He played it the same way, but he was, that was in 1947. Played with Charlie Congdon, old pro from Tacoma Country Club.
I wanted to add a little history of the Northwest for H. Chandler Egan, who designed Rogue Valley Country Club. We just finished dedicating the original course to him last weekend, and so we had his official historian from Exmoor Golf and Country Club in Chicago out, and H. Chandler Egan's grandson as well. We're both there. And they filled the halls. There were over 300 people there and to listen to the history of Chandler Egan, who is probably the best amateur to play the game prior to Bobby Jones by all his accomplishments. And you heard in the Olympics that he was the silver medalist individually, he was a gold medalist as a team. back in 1904, I believe it was. And he was a very prolific golf course designer. He designed Rogue Valley in 1924, the second nine in 1927. In the meantime, he did Eastmoreland. He redesigned Waverly from an 1896 design. Lake Oswego, Riverside. He also designed Pebble Beach. And I know for a fact he helped Alistair McKenzie design Cypress Point. He was also Bobby Jones' left pocket when he designed Augusta. And I only know this because of my relationship with Jim Fitzpatrick, who is a pretty famous golf artist. He and I have been history buffs for 30 or 40 years now, and we talk about it all the time. I got to play Cypress about 10 years ago, and I went in the locker room to change my shoes, and I looked up, and there was 2 photographs that had Mr. Chandler Egan in it. And it took me a year to get those photographs because things move rather slow at Cypress Point Club. But they are in our history files now, and it's just a mark of how prolific he was. And it's unfortunate he was in the middle of designing West Seattle Golf Club when he contracted pneumonia and died in 1936. And then to show you how well respected he was, they had Lawson Little, Grantland Rice, Bobby Jones, and a number of others show up for his funeral and did an exhibition in 1936. It's a very famous photograph that we have at Rogue Valley Country Club. So he's an amazing man.
Obviously, he was a great influence and got a lot of golf courses to be built in here, which obviously influenced us. You got golf courses, you got golf pros coming. And as far as Chandler Egan, our golf course, I wanted to go to that, Jim, but I couldn't go. But he won the 1905 and 1906 amateurs. I listed him on Dominic on mine as one of the greatest amateurs for the OGA. And he was a longtime member at Waverly, and I don't think without Chandler Egan, you have your minus a whole bunch of golf courses on here. I have a golf antique show in March, and we found a golf course called West Hills Golf Course. It's out on Canyon Drive, and I found a little booklet from 1923, and Chandler Egan designed West Hills Golf Course. So I'm going to call the gentleman from Explore and say we've got another golf course to add to Chandler Egan's design. But yeah, without Chandler Egan, golf might not be as big as it is in Portland, Oregon. So
Maybe Kent can help me with this, but having played there way back, how many of you played the old Lloyd's golf course? It was near Benson High School.
Right.
Yeah. And you'll probably you can fill me in on this stuff, but the pro there was Joe Moselle, I think.
right.
And he later started some kind of a National Senior Golf Association.
Yes, he did. He made a lot of money
And on one par, yeah, on one of the par threes, you shot across what was called at that time Sullivan's Gulch, which later became the freeway heading east out of Portland.
Yeah, Sweet Tibby Dunbar's, the restaurant. Yeah, that's the pro shop.
Yeah.
And then the golf course is all in I-84 right in there in Sullivan's Gulch. Because a couple of my guys, Norm Parsons and Shell Jones, Shell's still alive, they would caddy for guys. And there's one little hole at the bottom of the ravine, there's like a little cavern to go over the railroad tracks down there because the train went right through the middle of it. And they said, Norm and Shell said, every time we'd go into that little cavern, we're caddies, the players would say, you guys go ahead. And then they'd reach in their golf bags and they'd grab a bottle of booze. And they'd take a couple of snorts so no one could see them because they're in the little tunnel. But the caddies went forward. Yeah, it's a great golf course. A lot of history for Lloyd's. My dad used to caddy there. Yeah.
Caddied at Royal Oaks. Royal Oaks was built in about 48 or 9. The front nine, which now the back nine, was first, and I started caddying there. I think Rex and I both the same, about 1952 or 3. And that golf course, the backside, which now the front side, was built by basically the members' volunteer labor. They went out
and the clubhouse was plumbed and wired by professionals, but the members put the framing up and did the whole damn thing. And every weekend, there'd be rock picking groups that go out. The front side was full of rocks, and they'd go out with buckets, and they'd have 50, 60 members out there picking rocks by hand every weekend to get that thing cleaned up. And all the members had Croydon clubs. Remember that? They had a muscle back Croydon club because you could bash a couple rocks on it and still play with it. And I've never heard of a golf course being built in the original charter. They couldn't go into any debt. And so they built things, they had the cash, they did this, and they get some more cash, they do some more. And it took a long time to get it built like that because they couldn't have any debt. And a guy by the name of Charlie Hovey, H-O-V-E-Y, was the spearhead guy. He got the whole thing going. They had him be president for a long time because he had this project going. And he got it going. I mean, he just was a hellcat to get that thing finished. And when he got all done, he said, oh, by the way, I own the parking lot. And if you want to park there, here's what it's going to cost. And of course, they drummed him out of the club, and he left town. He took a bunch of money, and he owned the parking lot, and they had to finally figure out a way to get through that. But Charlie Hovey, I'll never forget that. And but that's a more recent deal. That was in the early 50s.
I remember growing up as a little kid and playing Shadow Hills and Illahee and Rock Creek. They all opened as I was a very young player, and the tallest trees on the course were white. They were stakes, and all you could see was the white stakes. Spring Hill. They had trees that were no higher than the bar, and we always speculated as kids, what was this course going to be like when these trees grew up? And 30, 40 years later, we found out they became very traditional courses with big trees.
It hasn't been mentioned yet, but most everyone is familiar with the fact that Eugene Country Club has been rated in the top 100 golf courses forever. But at one time, the golf course was exactly the opposite of what it is now. They reversed the greens and the tees, and I'm not sure what year it was. Anybody here know?
Early 60s.
Early 60s or 67. So, yeah,
I played in the PNJ Junior there, I think,
Yeah.
65.
so you played it in
The old course.
the old course, the original
Yeah.
course, yeah.
Played the old course.
That wasn't
The old course by Chandler Egan and the new course by Robert Trent
There
Jones.
you go.
Right, there you go, yeah.
And there wasn't a very happy decision. I know they lost a ton of members on the decision, and I heard later, whether it's true or not, somebody here may know, that the board held their vote, or they took a vote of the membership to whether to reverse the course, which means 18 green is where the first tee was, and not everybody was in favor of it, and they passed narrowly. Well, later on, I heard that they actually didn't pass, but they fudged on the vote, and so they went ahead and got it built, and then most of the members did come back because it turned out fine, but it was just exactly the opposite course.
How about rules of golf?
Just to get things started, I think that what they want to know is if we've had any experience with it. Well, I've had some experience with when you're on the board, or it used to be when you're on the board of the PGA, the national board, you are part of the rules committee for the PGA Championship and all these assorted and sundry events. And I was on the rules committee for the Ryder Cup match that we had at the that was at the Greenbrier, but I was involved with getting Trevino disqualified at the PGA in the 1980, and I was putting the cut cards in the box, and of course the three players come and sit down, and three then vice presidents then would take their cards and they'd make sure they were all signed. And Trevino played with Lanny Watkins and Weiskopf. And after everything was signed and was all over, a spectator was out looking at the board, and he said, "Could I have a copy of Trevino's card for souvenir?" And the guy said, "Sure." And he's looking at it, and he asked the guy, he said, "Does it make any difference that Trevino didn't sign this?" And of course, the crap hit the fan. And what happened was they were sitting at the table. Weiskopf throws Trevino's card, and for some reason, Lanny pulls it out of the air, signs his name. Of course, they pass it to me, and I look, 2 signatures. I put it in the box. But he, afterwards, he said, well, he said, that PGA, don't blame them. It's my responsibility to sign the card. He said, but boy, am I going to get my ass chewed when I get home. My wife will be hot.
He said, I was in that room when they disqualified him, and he looked at the card and he says, yeah, those are both my signatures. I guess I'm going to Texas to practice.
I gotta tell a funny story on my friend here to my left. He used to have a few issues on the golf course when things weren't going just right. And Bunny was the president of the chapter right at this particular time, and he'd had a few issues already. We used to have a fine. You get a fine for throwing a club. You can get and one time at the Dallas Pro-Am, Jimmy was one of the better players in the section, and he sold for a lot in the Calcutta they had up there. And he gets paired with 3 members from Tualatin, and we're out there, and he's not going too good. And sometimes when he wasn't going too good, he'd tend to play ahead of his group, like 100 yards or so ahead of his group. And so he's finally got the members pissed off, and he's out there on one of these holes, and he's in the left rough about 100 yards out, and oh, excuse me, he hit this ball. The reason he's in the rough is he'd hit from his tees, and he hit a bad snap hook, and he whops his club on this beautiful salmon they had for tee markers, beautiful ceramic, and of course it breaks in the smithereens, and he heads down the left field, and the guys are yelling at him, get out of the way. And it turns out that was a chairman of the board trick, and he paid for the salmon tee markers, and he's playing with him. So that's when Bunny put him on permanent lifetime suspension, probation, and he's never lifted it, actually.
That's right.
Permanent probation.
I was fined $100 for that deal, but I also did something pretty bad there. I walked off the golf course after a round, and I was talking to myself, and I wasn't using the best language in the world, and 3 of the club members, lady members, heard me, and that's how I got the real suspensions. So.
Well, wait a minute now, let me. I was kind of involved in that, and the story I got on my friend Jim was that he was over about a 3 or 4 footer, missed it, and then screamed the F word, and it just bounced around those canyons for about 5 minutes, and that's when they called him in. And he was a baseball pitcher. And before this, we got the story that he was pitching a game in Salem, and the shortstop fumbled the ball, and he goes over and grabs him by the shirt and says, "You horse's ass, I'm trying to win a game here." So when we heard the temper, we kind of understood where the other came from.
I think as the years go along farther, the stories get much better on me.
No. We don't dare tell the really bad ones.
But I have to say, I did have a bad temper.
Because you cared.
But along the rules of golf, I'll have to tell you a funny story about, and there was a time when I used to take and put clear lacquer on my face of my golf club, and then I'd give it a good lick before I'd hit the shot, and that ball would come out of there sort of like old Bob Duden's grease balls. But anyway, they passed a law about that. I don't know who started it, but there was a rule about foreign substance on the club face. Well, I was playing in the Royal Oaks Open, or the Northwest Open, and I was paired with Bob Duden. And for some reason, I had a caddy, and Duden was pushing his cart. which was sort of odd to me. But anyway, long story short, I could see that when he'd hit that fairway wood, that ball would come out of there like a shot. So along about the 10th hole, I finally figured out what he had. He had the cart, and he had a towel over the handle and a little bit of his clubs. And just before the tee, when everybody was up there, he'd reach under that down there. He had a couple of gobs of Vaseline, and he'd put it on his ball or on his face of his clubs. And Bob's a very good friend of mine. I've played a lot of golf with him, and he and I both went to Hazeltine in the Senior Open, and he was a good friend of mine. But I went up to him and I said, Bob, I said, if you do that one more time, reach under that cart, I'm gonna call it on you. And he was good. And never bothered. We're still good friends. But that was one of the rules. I had a rule against me one time that I did up at the Lilac City Open. Who was the golf pro, the senior?
Durgan.
No, well, no, at Tacoma Country Club. He played senior tour, left-handed. Lanning. He was a rules freak, I guess. But anyway, I finished the third round, and I think I was in about third place. And I went down on one of the empty holes in the woods, and I was hitting some wedge shots. And I've seen that happen with Al Mengert. He used to go out on the middle of the golf course down on the first hole and hit shots. And I never thought nothing about it. Well, I see George Lanning drive by me, turn around and go back up to the clubhouse and talk to Joe Durgan, and I come out to tee up the next morning, and I'm disqualified. Of course, I screamed pretty hard, too. And I told that Joe that how come you let Mengert go out there and do that all the time? And I've been playing that tournament for years and years. Well, I got stuck, and I went over and thanked George because they told me while I was out warming up on the practice tee to play my round. Well, I went home. Needless to say, I never went back to that tournament. But so I gave one, and I had to take one.
On the rules, I have not seen many infractions in the whole time that I've played golf, very few. In the Hudson Cup matches at Portland Golf Club, I forget which year it was, Joe Colello, who had won the Washington Open, he was a pretty new amateur player, and we were playing Harvey Hickson and Al Feldman. We had them down one going into the 17th hole. And so all Joe had to do is knock in a 3-foot putt, and we win, 2-1. So Joe gets up, he marks his ball, and then he just puts the putter down, doesn't move his coin back, and sticks the ball down, and knocks it in, and they say the match is even. That they called the hole on us. Yeah. And so I protested at that time. I waited a long time till Al Mengert, who was the pro captain, came by, and he ruled against us. However, Harvey Hickson, I might say we won on the 18th hole. That was poetic justice. But Harvey Hickson wrote me a letter 6 weeks later, very nice letter, said, Kent, I was wrong. Because I'd asked, I said, did he get the ball back exactly in the place where it was? And they said, yes, he had it back in exactly the place. And I said, what's the problem? But they called us on it. And so that was a rules infraction, but there's debate. And that's one thing I like about golf. It's played by rules. It's a great game. It's kind of like the Constitution of the United States.
I think that's what separates our game from so many games. It's up to the individual to follow the rules, and if he knowingly breaks the rules, it's his responsibility to report that. And the other ones have all the referees watching, And if you watch basketball, it looks like the referee's got some money bet on that team, the way things are going. But in our junior programs, the first tee is a wonderful thing that's going on, and they are very strong in teaching integrity and honesty and what makes this game so great. So I think that's a wonderful thing that's going on. And since we're on rules, I have to throw in one more Bunny Mason story. I forget where they were playing. Bunny came in to sign his card. His friend Dale was sitting there, and Bunny got ready to sign his card, and Dale said, Bunny, I understand you threw a club out there. I guess he'd signed his card because it wasn't an infraction. And Bunny said, yes, I did. And Dale said, well, that'll be $25 fine. So Bunny got out a check, and he wrote out his check, and he handed it to Dale. And Dale said, no, I said $25. You wrote a check for $50. And Bunny said, I got a hunch I'm going to throw one tomorrow.
A ruling I had to make here for the members at Columbia years ago, we had a member by the name of John Brennan, and he was pretty excitable. And there was only a couple of members that would play with him on purpose. And so we had a trouble getting him a game. He'd come down sometimes he was always a single. And do you have anybody? For me? I said, yeah, John, go out and get on the front putting green out of sight, and I'll see who I can find. And if they asked a threesome if they had room for one, they said, is John here? You know, they'd look around. But he was kind of a pain because he never stopped talking. He was constantly talking. So anyway, Bill Curry would play with him. So they're having a match one day, and on the 10th hole, under summer rules, Bill hooked it up on the side of the dike on the left side here, and the grass is about 8 inches high. And John says, summer rules, you remember. Okay, yeah. Curry heads over there. John runs over the right, hits his second shot as fast as he can because he's afraid Curry's going to cheat on him. So he chases him up the hill, and they find the ball in the rough about midway between the top of the grass and the ground, and about grass this high. And it's got a big gob of mud on it. And John says, summer rules, you got to play it. And Bill says, I need to clean my ball. No, you can't clean your ball. You can't touch your ball. He says, I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to clean it. With that, he whipped it out and peed on his ball. Oh, God. John goes crazy. He practically runs the whole 18, the whole backside, runs in the shop. Listen to what Kerry did on 10. And Kerry finally comes sauntering in. He wants a ruling. So I said, well, you've obviously improved your lives, so I guess John wins this one, wins that hole. Johnny Brennan.
I have the ultimate in rules. Mike Graham, who was a big favorite in the Oregon Coast tournament years ago, was playing some schluck who drives the ball up against a tree. Somebody does. They call the pro, who was Bob Gasper. He was the head pro at Astoria. He ran it up, the ball's up against the little tree. Bob goes out there and he says, we need a ruling on this. This ball is here. And of course, Mike Graham is there and the other guys are. He looks at it and he looks around and he says, well, whose ball is it? Figure that one out. You didn't get it, huh?
Wrong question.
We got two rulings.
I was working the World Series one year, and I got a call to go pick up the group on 13, or I think it was 13. And so I drove over there, and it just happened Jack Nicklaus was in the group, and he had his fuzzy-haired, you remember the fuzzy-haired guy? What was his name? Angela, yeah. And Angie was his caddy. Well, I guess he had given Jack a couple of bad yardages, so all of a sudden Jack decided, as I was keeping the times for all three players, he was the only one with a bad time, and he was doing his own yardages. He was going up and pacing them off and everything like that. So when I got all through at the end of 18, he had more than enough bad times. So I turned it in to Jack Tuthill, who was in charge of the tour staff. And so he went and found Jack and penalized him 2 strokes. And so Jack wanted to see the timing sheet, so he came down to the trailer, and he walked in, and I thought, oh boy, I'm gonna get it now. And he just read the sheet, saw what all the times were, and said thanks, and walked out. But that was the last job Angie had. That was the last caddy job that he did.
Tournaments, Oregon Open, Northwest Open, Oregon Amateur, Hudspeth, Hudson Cup.
The Oregon Open was at Tualatin in 1955, and one of the most important things about it, and I heard that people talk about Joe Moselle, and Joe Moselle made a hole-in-one on the first hole. He hit his tee shot onto the 3rd green, rolled in the hole, and as far as I know, that's probably the only hole-in-one on that hole ever made.
The Oregon Open was at Waverly, and I believe it was in the 70s, late 60s or 70s. And Boots Porterfield on the 9th hole, I was standing in the parking lot, and this loud roar, and he had just made a hole-in-one. And Ralph Deester, he says to Ralph Deester and the other guy, he says, top that one. So Ralph Deester stepped up, knocked his shot in, and said back-to-back hole-in-ones there at Waverly on the, I believe it was the 9th hole.
9th hole.
Yeah. I think so, but it was Boots Porterfield and Ralph Deester.
Just short.
Boots, I think hit the best shot because his bounced past the hole and sucked it right back down the hole, and Deester's hit in front of the pin and bump,
He's an amateur.
and went in.
I can remember playing in the Oregon Open, I think in 73 or 4. I mean, it was after I was on tour, but I played in the Oregon Open. It was at Corvallis Country Club, and there's a lot of Bob Duden stories relative to the Oregon Open because he won 8 or 10 of them or something. And the Corvallis has very small greens that are very sloped. And Bob Duden at that time was not putting side saddle and was not putting croquet. He was trying to putt regular. And he literally, it looked like, well, it was hard to move. Everything moved in his body except the putter head. And he had these little side hill 6-footers for birdies and eagles, and I mean, it was literally the body got 4 feet ahead of the putter, and then somehow he dragged the putter through and he left it on the low side and tapped in, and he won the tournament.
I was playing in the Oregon Open at Willamette Country Club, and I played real well in the Pro-Am, finished I think 2nd. And I was playing real well in the first round of the Oregon Open. I was playing with David Glens, who is now he was a real good amateur, and he's now in New Jersey. And so on the last hole, my caddy pulls the pin out, and the whole apparatus come out. And he got it back together, and the ball goes up and goes, he got the pin out, the ball goes up and goes tink against the pin, about 30 feet away. And he'd already cost me a couple strokes earlier, talking me in to hit this shot. But anyway, on about the 5th hole or so in the round, I'd lipped out about a 30-footer. And so I'm giving my caddy hell, I'm walking toward the clubhouse, and this lady comes up. This is the first time they'd had it at Willamette Valley. Says to me, are you Mr. Denham? I said, yes. She says, well, you had a 3 on the 5th hole. You didn't have a 4. And I said, well, I can't change it. And she said, well, the guy at the desk said to change it. I said, well, I'll change that if Dale Johnson tells me to change it. And she said, well, where are you going to be? I said, I'm in the bar. You better hurry. Dale comes in and he says, what happened? And I told him, I said, you don't have to tell me what happened. I said, it's DQ, I know. So I went, one of the members says to me at the golf course, it says, how come you didn't play in the Oregon Open? I said, well, I did. I said, I made the fastest fade in the history of the tournament. And they said, well, what was that? And I said, well, I went from 5th to 10th to 192nd in about 5 minutes.
As part of history of the chapter, I think the golf professionals that follow us in the future should understand what a superior tournament program we had in the chapter and the section. When I had the opportunity to go back and talk to people from other chapters, they couldn't believe the number of parameters we had and what we played for and how organized the whole section was. So hopefully the newer golf professionals coming in appreciate that. And I think it's important that the newer golf professionals be sure to participate in the program. Originally, pro-ams were started where the golf professional would spend the day with 3 board members, and in the automobile going to and from is when they could hash out some problems. And you probably could say some things in the car you would never say in the board meeting. But it took me a while to realize how much the members want to go and appreciate going to play with their golf professional.
We had, as Vern alluded to, we had probably the best, maybe the Met section would be close, or South Carolinas, but we had the best tournament program schedule up here in the Northwest. It started mostly, and most of the sponsors are from Oregon, and we played for more money, had better tournaments than any other place. We had to have qualifying. I remember one year at the section meeting, I had to stand up as a tournament chairman and say, we've instituted a way for, we might have to qualify for these events. We put in an exemption program to where some people would be exempt, but the people were upset. You could not get in the tournaments. We had way more players than we had spots for them to play, and then we had to limit the amateur field. And it was really the biggest problem was trying to get everybody in the tournament that should be in the tournament, and without pissing anybody off. And unfortunately, the amateur field got cut back. Nowadays, they're begging the amateurs to play because we haven't got any professionals to play. It's completely flip-flopped. You don't play. We're not playing for a third of the money now that we played for routinely in the 70s. And Pat knows he won a lot of money, and these guys up here, we played, there's a lot of money to play for. And that just came from personal relationships with members who were in the business and were interested in helping. Norm Daniels, G.I. Joe's, and Bill Charay of Barry Services, and Al Giusti, which in the Payless Classic. Duke Matthews started the Payless down at Shadow Hills, and that was the first big one. And then they dropped out after a while, and that became the Giusti. Then we had the Equitable Savings and Loan, and those years went on for then. Norm Daniels picked that up with G.I. Joe's for a few years, and
Lamb.
yeah, Lamb, and it was really everyone loved it. And Rose Hours got started about then, and they're the only one that's persevered, and it's probably one of the best section tournaments in the country right now up in Spokane. And it all came out of getting it started right here in the Oregon chapter.
Well, it came out of Columbia, Edgewater, and Jerry Mold. That's where it mostly came from. And Ron Coleman picked up pretty well. And it was promotion within Jerry's club. Columbia was known as the Players Club. And I think anybody that was in business that, was out at Columbia was more than happy to kind of get, in with players and in with the whole tournament scene.
Just a little history on your Oregon Open. If you look on that trophy, you'll see, I think Tommy Armour is on that trophy. And also, I think Gene Saracen also won the Oregon Open way back when. So the Oregon Open has a tremendous history with some wonderful names on that.
Dom, I want to talk a little bit about junior tournament golf, because the pros behind me and the ones before them, great influence on junior golf, which created a lot of activity in the game during the 50s and 60s. When I was a junior player, we could play in 3 golf tournaments as a junior. We had the Oregon Junior, Oregon State Junior, and then the Southern Oregon Junior at Rogue Valley, and then you could play in the PNGA Junior, and that was it, 3. And so people like Eddie Hogan came along at Riverside, and Howard Boner at Waverly, and Larry Lamberger at Portland Golf Club, and all of these pros. We got together with them after I got out of school. Bob Norquist and George Mack and I said, you know, we should have more tournaments, and we reached out to all of the pros throughout the state. And I remember calling the head pro at Bend Golf Club. I don't remember his name. And within a couple weeks was the Central Oregon Junior was born. And then we called down at Astoria, and they had the Coast Junior. And all the pros got behind all of that, and they all created junior programs, which they all have now. And now, 50 years later, in 2017, if you're a junior golfer in the state of Oregon, you can play in 45 junior tournaments in the state of Oregon from April 1st to October 1st. And I'm working with a couple of young players right now, and they play in a tournament almost every week, especially in the summer. And that was all born because of the head pros that took a liking and helped create junior activity in their own clubs. And without that, future of the game is in trouble.
Great players in Oregon.
When I tried to decide who they're going to be, there were a lot of them. But I got to find them. Oh, obviously Dick Yost. Most of this crowd, I think, is old enough to remember Yost, Bruce Cudd, Don Krieger, Kent Myers. Jesus, I hit pretty good with the guys here. And you know, when I was kind of looking around, I ran across a name. I'm old enough to remember him by the name of Lou Jennings.
Yeah.
Lou Jennings was a member of Portland Golf Club, 1939 through that era. And I didn't realize that he won the Oregon Amateur 3 times. But what I remember most about Lou is he played in the Pro Amateur prior to one of the, or no, I guess he played in the Portland Open with Ben Hogan. And afterwards they asked Hogan what he thought about Lou Jennings. And he said, without a doubt, that's the best golf swing I have ever seen. But we had good players. We didn't have the junior program then, but we had, it goes back to, we had golf professionals who cared. And of course, in those days, when you practiced, you went out and hit your bucket, went out and picked up your bucket, came back, threw them on the ground, went out, hit your bucket. We didn't have driving ranges. But those fellows, we had a lot of good players. These are just a few of them. And some of the other fellows behind me will hopefully bring up some of those. But those are the ones that came to mind to me first.
I'll bring up my generation. Players that I played with were included Bob Allard and Fred Haney, who both won the United States Pub Links tournament. Dave Glenns, who is the Met Section Player of the Year many times and an Oregon Amateur winner. Mike Spang, who was a very unfulfilled player, but probably played better golf than anybody I ever saw at a very young age. Alan Brooks won the U.S. Junior. So there were a lot of players that were in my era. Jim McLean was up in Seattle, but he played in our Oregon tournaments as well. So we had a lot of players in the late 60s, early 70s that were very fine players.
Yeah, you can.
Well, I'll give my list pretty much the same as Vern was. Dave Yost, Bruce Cudd, Dick Esty, Pat Fitzsimons, and the Chicken Hawk. And if you don't know who the Chicken Hawk is, it's my very good friend Kent Myers. And he got that name playing down at Salem Illahee. And I was paired with Duke Matthews, and Kent was playing in the group in front of us, And for some reason, he walked up on his second shot or third. He didn't hit a good second shot, and he walked all the way to the green and pin and back. And Matthews yelled out, you could hear it all over the whole golf course, "Hey, chicken hawk, you use your watch?"
On my list, I put a lot of the guys, and Pat knows I'm a little bit more in the era, but one of the early guys, someone mentioned Dr. Willing up here, but Neil Christian, I took my first golf lesson from Neil in 1974. He was teaching on the range at Riverside. He was a good friend of Eddie Hogan's, who Eddie was a great player too. But Neil won 3 Washington Opens, 3 Northwest Opens, 2 Idaho Opens, and 3 Oregon match plays. So you don't know that, but he was the head professional at Waverly from 1927 to 1933, so that's way back. A couple of amateurs, I actually put a couple ladies in there. I think Marcia Fisher and Mary Budke were wonderful players. I think Marcia's won 8 Oregon amateurs, and Mary Budke won the Oregon Amateur 2 or 3 times. She won the NCAA championship, so you can't forget about those ladies. And I put Kent in there, and I put Bruce in there. So Dr. Willing was another one I put in there. So some great golfers going all the way back into the 20s.
I've just got some sidebars to the what I'll call the great players. They were incidents that have stuck with me. When you mentioned Doc Willing, I had a very memorable experience with him because in 1953 I was fortunate enough to qualify for the National Amateur, and Doc Willing came over to me and gave me a 50-cent piece and said, "This will help with some of your expenses." And one of the members said to me, "My God, that guy must have really liked you and your game, because I had never done anything like that before." The other one that was a bit memorable involved Al Zimmerman, but it also involved Al Besselink, and was playing in the last round of the LA Open at Riviera in 1953. And Besselink, as most of you know, was a rather gaudy, verbose, noisy, whatever else you want to say. And on the side of his golf bag, he had a picture of Terry Moore, who was quite a celebrated actress at that time, very attractive. And a young guy like me, I said to him, "Gee, do you know Terry Moore?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I know her very well." And he said, "I usually drop her off at home about 10:30 at night. And by 11 o'clock, she calls me. And she'll be out to follow around the back 9. And she was, and it absolutely blew my mind to think, here I'm playing with a guy that I know from Portland and a fellow that I obviously don't know, and here's Terry Moore following us around the back 9. So that's player's memory.
A lot of people don't know, but we watch this. Bruce played in 4 Masters, 5? 4 Masters, and played on the winning team for the Walker Cup at St. Andrews, right? And you won your match. Yeah. How many people know that? Not bad, folks.
In 1950, the year I was born, about probably 3 months before I was born, the Hudson Cup match, there was a match between Porky Oliver, Ed Porky Oliver, and he was partners with Stan Leonard against Gene Littler and Al Mingert. And other than Porky Oliver, who passed away fairly early, I ended up being able to play with, well, 17 years later, I played Al Mingert in the Hudson Cup, and he was the pro, and he thrashed me. And I got to play with Gene Littler on tour, and Stan Leonard, a very fine gentleman from Canada who won the Canadian Open, or at least won a couple of tour events. I got to play with him too. So I think that's a really a real verse on the Hudson Cup and the type of players that were playing around the Northwest.
Bruce talked about playing in the Masters, so I asked him one time years ago, I said, "Bruce, what was it like playing in the Masters?" And he said, "It's the best damn 36-hole tournament I've ever played in."
Oh, God. Talking about Porky Oliver brings up a memory that the Oregon Open was at the Dalles, and Porky Oliver played in that. Well, to have a man of his stature there, that was quite a deal. But I don't think anybody here is old enough to remember the old in the clubhouse, the locker room was down about 3 or 4 steps in there. And the story goes that Porky got done and he came in to change his shoes, and he was sitting in front of his locker, and he opened it up, and somebody had coiled a dead rattlesnake looking right at him. And the story goes that he came up out of that basement and didn't touch anything for about 25 yards.
Teachers of the game and regionalize it for Portland, Metro, Central Oregon, and Southern Oregon.
My teachers, the ones that I've been around, Jerry Moles, Jim Wilkinson, Al Mundell, Larry Lamberger, Eddie Fisher. I think that's one of the reasons that our golf in Oregon and the Northwest has been strong. We've had so many really good teachers. And having good teachers just breeds people who watch them, listen to them. And we've had good teachers who have come from out. I remember Ted Longworth was a teacher at Waverly, must have been the late 40s, and he was one of Hogan's early teachers. And he spent a couple years there, and I took a lesson from him, and I hit 3 balls, and he said, "Here, watch." And he went through the small bucket, and he said, "I think you got it," and he left. And he got, I think my dad probably paid him $5.
I think you have to add Howard Boner. When I was a kid, high school, Howard Boner at Waverly taught every day, all day. And he never did not leave the range. And I don't think anybody gave anywhere near as many lessons as he gave in those years in the late 50s all through the 60s until he retired. And then, you know, other teachers, you know, does anybody remember Bobby Litton?
Oh, yeah.
Bobby Litton was a Spalding rep and a very popular guy. Spalding was big in the section, and he was always helping somebody do something, play better golf, get a better job. He was kind of the unofficial, what do you call the job guys now, that he'd go, if a job was open, he'd pick out who he thought should apply for it, and he'd put it together. And he did that way back in the 50s and the 60s, and he was instrumental in getting Royal Oaks started. He was one of the movers and shakers over there, and was always there when he was not working, and he helped all the kids out with their golf and just a few little tips. He wouldn't be giving you an official league lesson, but he'd see you do something or mention something, and so he was a very helpful teacher. But see, I got a couple other names, and you know, Billy Eggers gave a lot of lessons, and somebody said once that they, after a while listening to Bill, that they were starting to worry about themselves because they think they actually understood what he said. Billy Eggers. His own language. That's right. He had his own way of saying things. He would leave out. He would say something, and then he'd figure out what your response should be and what he might say, and he'd be about 3 or 4 thoughts ahead of you to say the next thing. And sometimes the next thing he said would be after what you thought you might have said, and he would respond to that. And so he talked kind of ahead of you all the time. But he obviously could really strike a golf ball and had some problems putting, but he should have won the Denver Open for sure. He helped Chichi Rodriguez the night before the last round. Chichi beat him the last day. Bill finished second in Denver, and if he'd have won that tournament, it might have changed his whole life. And Donnie,
I was the money man for Bill when he left town.
Yeah.
He was something else. He said, he called me, because a long distance call back in the whenever it was a big deal. So he called me, I said, Bill, I said, what are you doing in Phoenix? I said, the tour's over in Denver. He said, well, I had a little problem over there. He always had a problem. And to say that he was a marginal putter he was the worst putter I think, well, top 5. But he could play.
Yeah, he could really hit his ball.
But you could talk to that guy and he'd talk for an hour and he'd say, what the hell did he say? What did,
I went out one time to,
he was your partner, wasn't he?
Out of Charbonneau, because I was having little trouble chipping. And so Eggers took me out on the range, and he had a big tall friend who sold some kind of equipment. He says, "You mind if I go with you?" I said, "No, go ahead." So we go out there, and Bill goes through about 15 minutes, and I hit a couple. He says, "I think you got it." He said, "Stay here, work on it a little bit. I'll see you in the shop." So he walked away, and I looked over at this guy, and he looked at me, and he said, "Did you understand one word he said?" Because he would always hit the ball down the air. Now, how can you hit a ball down the air? But it meant something to Bill.
When he hit it over the wind, too.
Over the wind.
Over the wind.
Yeah.
Over the wind.
I started at Riverside. Fred Haney was teaching, and also a name out of the past, Bob Ellsworth was taught there, Elsie. And so you learned a lot from those guys. But Fred's continued to teach till now. Great teacher. That's going all the way back to the 70s and 80s. But Elsie had quite a following, and I think he ended up going to Florida teaching down there. So a couple of veterans there. So.
One of the better lessons I've had wasn't from an Oregon professional. It was from a Northwest professional, Charlie Congdon. And we were playing here at Columbia Edgewater in a Pro-Am type tournament. And I said, "Charlie, I'm hitting an awful lot of shots that wind up just to the right of the green. What do you think I should do?" He said, "Why don't you aim a little further left?"
Yeah. Chuck Congdon wasn't from down here, but boy, he gave a ton of lessons. He was probably one of the best all-around golf pros in the history of golf. I mean, he not only was in the governance part, he was a very smart guy. He was the president of the section. I think he was a national officer at one time. He could play really, really well. He taught all the players in Seattle for years and years. He had all those women, Ruth Jessen and the other names, Eilenfeld, and like Joe said, he alluded to how he trained his assistants. If you worked for Chuck Congdon, you're going to get a good job, period. And he was, like I say, probably the all-around best all-around golf professional in the Northwest.
I'll have to say that when Charlie said something, people listened. I had a session playing the Portland Open, and I was paired with Charlie, and I had it going pretty good. It was in the second round. I was about 3 or 4 under, and out came Joe Black. Joe Black was, to me, a gangster, but he was a mean guy, he was, and I guess maybe I was playing a little bit slow. And we were 3/4 of a hole behind or something, and Joe was in that cart, and Charlie Congdon goes over and he says, "Leave the kid alone." And Joe Black turns around and goes right back to the clubhouse. I'll never forget that. That was...
Okay. Charlie Congdon, but Jerry Mose, Wilkinson, Cross, Walter Porterfield, Mason, Vern Perry, Eggers, Al Mundell, Al Cross, and Ted Longworth. And I took a lesson from Uncle Ted also over there, Perry, but he spent a little more time with me. Guess I needed more help. But Ted Longworth won the PGA in Oregon, or Northwest PGA, about 5 times. And of course, Hogan and Byron Nelson both caddied down there when he was in Texas. And then he moved up to Waverly in about 1932 and proceeded to win everything up here in the Northwest. I think Washington Open and a few other things.
Great stories on local competitors.
This is in the Oregon Amateur being played at Portland Golf Club. And it was a player from Medford, and this will be kind of a brain teaser for everyone. And we're playing the 15th hole at Portland. I'm in the group behind. And it's taking them a long time to finish the 15th hole. And here's what happened. This competitor was in the left greenside bunker. 15 at Portland's a par 5, out of bounds all the way down the left-hand side. He's hitting a bunker shot. He blasts out. The ball comes up, and he hits the ball in midair. The ball then goes backwards and bounces off of his shoulder and hits out of the bunker on the side hill and goes out of bounds. That's an absolute true story. So now they're trying to figure out what he shot on the hole. So I asked all these bright guys here behind me, what was his score? He was in the bunker in 3. He hit it out in 4. He hit it in midair. Then it hit him. Then it went out of bounds. What was the ruling? Because it took about a half an hour.
Shooting 24. I think you can only get penalized 2 strokes on a shot, right?
That's exactly what happened. There's a rule in the book at the time, I don't know if it is right now, that the most penalty strokes that you can be assessed in one swing is a total of 4.
I had that happen. I hit a shot that I got caught up in the blackberries and it hit my body and then rolled down and hit my bag. So I knew the rule.
There's a story that a lot of these guys heard had to do with a hudspeth. And it had to do with Harvey Hickson. In one of the Hudspeth specials, the fellow, his partner, had bought him in the Calcutta. And they got around to the 15th hole, which is a par 4 the first time around. It's a par 3 the second time around. So this is a par 3. Harvey's leading the tournament, which means then he's going to win $500, but his partner is going to win several thousand when he wins the Calcutta. Partner hits the ball on the green, so they're all happy. Harvey hits his, it lands on top of his partner's ball, goes over the fence, out of bounds. And end of victory. But it's fate. I guess it happens.
This is a story, and it's a Bunny Mason story in a way, but it involves me as much as it does Bunny. 3 years ago, we were playing. Myself and my team were playing in the senior spring tour at Black Butte Glaze Meadow. For those who have played it, the 15th hole is that 5-par that seems to go around in a circle. Right. Well, it was recently redesigned by John Fote, I believe, did the redesign. But anyway, still, you got it. The fairway slopes right to left, hard dog leg right. You still have to go around the corner to get to it a couple of times. And in the practice round, I hit a tee ball that I thought was absolutely perfect. I cut the corner with a little fade, and it goes out there, and it hits the fairway, and I just know we're going to get up there, and it's going to be right in the middle of the fairway. I get up there, and sure enough, it is kicked down into the fairway bunker. And I get in there, and I take one swing, and I hit the lip of the bunker, and I just thought I'd ripped it, and I got so frustrated, I went, "Bunny, how can you possibly build a hole like this?" And I took my club and I winged it down the fairway. This is a practice round. So
That'll be 50.
I know it. So the next day we get out and we play the round in the tournament, and this time I did almost the same shot. I hit it out in the middle of the fairway. It kind of hung on the left side of the fairway, and I get up there and I rip my second shot right at the green, go up, and we can't find my ball. Look behind the green, and I'm thinking, "Oh, Bunny, have you done it to me again?" Well, turns out the ball ended up in the hole. I made a double eagle in the Pro-Am, and I said, "Well, Bunny, you're not so bad after all, are you?
I'll tell on myself, I was playing pretty well. It was, Duke Matthews was the pro at Shadow Hills. What year would that have been? 60s maybe,
Yeah.
65, 66. And the first time I'd ever played Shadow Hills, and we got to the ninth, I'm playing with Duke, and it's the last round of the tournament, I think. And I'm going pretty good. I'm leading. I get to the 18th hole, which is that dogleg around the trees with the lake, and I hit it down the right side. And we come over, and I find my ball, and I've got a couple trees there, but I can see this way. And he says, I said, what's this hole do? And he said, well, you got to get out there. You're going to either have to lay up over here, or a lot of times you can go right through there and hit it across. The out of bounds ends up there on the right. And so if you hit it across there and you hit it good, you're all right. So I said, well, that looks like a pretty good deal. So I take a forward and I nail it up the right, and I hit it pretty good. It hits the stake on the fly and goes out over here. And I says, what? He says, well, I think that's out of bounds. And out of bounds? He said, yeah. He said, that's the last stake. You hit it and went this way. Oh, great. So I drop another ball, goes right on my divot. And it's not a terrible divot, but it's a divot. So I'm pissed off. I take my forward. I'm going to do it again. So now I hit it good, nail this one. It goes up and hits a little tree up there. And he says, I think that's out of bounds again. So I make a 10. So the next year we're back there for the Northwest PGA Championship, right? I think it's the following year. And it's my 9th hole on the second round. And I'm 3 or 4 under par again. I come to this hole. It's the 9th hole. I'm playing it backwards. I hit it at almost exactly the same place. And so there's a little hole in that tree up there if you ever saw it. And God, I don't want to try to go on that boundary deal, and I don't want to lay up over here, so I take my forward. I can hit it through there. And meanwhile, there's about 30 or 40 Shadow Hills members have showed up from no place to see if I can make another 10. Well, I did. I made another 10. I make 10 on a hole 2 times in a row on that hole. It wasn't that much fun, actually.
I don't know.